If there is one sound that can split a man's life into before and after, it's not a scream. It's the quiet voice of the woman who spent her entire life protecting you, suddenly asking for help. My phone rang at exactly 6:41 that Thursday morning. When I saw Mom on the screen, I smiled. She never called before breakfast. Never. She always said mornings were for coffee, prayer, and letting people wake up in peace. So when I answered and heard her whisper my name, I knew something was terribly wrong. "Daniel!" Her voice was barely there. "I don't think I'm feeling right." Every instinct inside me came alive. "What happened?" "My chest feels strange." She paused. "And my arm, it won't stop tingling." My heart stopped. Not because I thought, because I knew. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 54 years old. I've spent most of my life believing that family means showing up, no matter what it costs. That belief came from one person, my mother. Margaret Brooks wasn't wealthy. She wasn't famous. She wasn't the loudest person in any room. But she was the strongest. She raised me to believe that love isn't measured by words. It's measured by who arrives when life falls apart. When my father died 13 years ago, she buried him with tears she refused to let anyone else carry. She sold his fishing boat to pay the funeral expenses before I even knew money was tight. Every Sunday afterward, she still insisted on cooking enough food for anyone who wanted to stop by. Neighbors, church friends, old classmates. It didn't matter. Her table always had another chair. She never asked anyone for help, not once. Which is why hearing fear in her voice that morning terrified me more than I can explain. "I'm coming," I said immediately. "Stay seated. Don't move." "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't want to bother you." The sentence broke something inside me. 81 years old, and she was still apologizing for needing her own son. "I'm leaving right now." I grabbed my jacket. Then reality hit. My pickup truck was still at the repair shop after the transmission failed 2 days earlier. The only vehicle at home belonged to my wife. A nearly new blue SUV sat in our driveway. Full tank, ready to go. I looked upstairs. The shower was running. I rushed to the staircase. "Laura!" The water kept pouring. "Laura!" The shower finally stopped. A few seconds later, her voice echoed through the hallway. "What?" "My mom needs the hospital." Silence. "My truck's in the shop." Another silence. "I need your SUV." Footsteps, slow, unhurried. Then she appeared at the top of the stairs wearing a white robe, drying her hair with a towel. She didn't look frightened. She didn't even look surprised. She simply stared at me. "What exactly happened?" "Chest pain." "Her left arm is numb." "I have to leave now." She folded her arms. Then came 6 words that would change everything. "Call an ambulance. I'm busy today." For one long second, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. But the expression on her face told me something far worse. I hadn't. And as she turned away without another word, I had no idea that her decision that morning was about to cost her far more than she could ever imagine. Daniel finds an unexpected ally who rushes his mother to the hospital without hesitation. But while one stranger proves what loyalty truly means, Laura makes another choice that quietly destroys her marriage forever. I stood there for exactly 2 seconds. Not because I didn't know what to do, because I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. The woman I'd shared a home with for 12 years had looked me straight in the eyes and decided that her schedule mattered more than my mother's life. There wasn't time to argue. There wasn't time to beg. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the first person who came to mind. Tom Harrison. Tom lived 3 houses down, 69 years old, retired firefighter, the kind of man who still waved at every neighbor and shoveled driveways without being asked whenever it snowed. He answered before the second ring. "Daniel?" "Tom, I need help." His voice changed instantly. "What's wrong?" "My mother's having chest pains. My truck's in the shop. I don't have a way to get her to the hospital." I never finished the sentence. "I'm leaving now," Tom said. "No questions. Give me 3 minutes." The call ended. 3 minutes. That was all it took for someone who wasn't even family to show more compassion than the person sleeping in my own bedroom. I called my mother back. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart?" I'm on my way. Oh, Daniel, you don't have to rush. I do. I'll be there in a few minutes. She hesitated. I hate causing trouble. I closed my eyes. You've never been trouble? Not once. I'll see you soon. Tom's old pickup rolled into my driveway exactly 3 minutes later. He leaned across the passenger seat and opened the door before I reached him. Let's go. Nothing more. No lecture. No curiosity. Just action. As we drove across town, neither of us spoke much. The morning traffic felt endless. Every red light seemed personal. Every slow driver felt like another obstacle between me and the woman who had spent her entire life putting everyone else first. Tom finally broke the silence. She's a strong woman. I nodded. The strongest I know. Then let's make sure she stays that way. Those simple words carried more comfort than he probably realized. When we reached my mother's house, the front door was already unlocked, just like I'd asked. She was sitting in her favorite chair near the window, still wearing the light blue sweater she'd knitted herself years earlier. She smiled when she saw us. Actually smiled. I'm sorry to make everyone fuss. I knelt beside her. Mom, her hand felt colder than usual, much colder. Can you stand? I think so. Tom gently supported one side while I held the other. Neither of us rushed her. Every step toward the truck felt heavier than the last. Halfway down the walkway, she suddenly stopped. A sharp breath escaped her lips. Her fingers tightened around my arm. Daniel. The color drained from her face. Mom? My chest. She couldn't finish the sentence. For one terrifying second, her knees buckled beneath her. I caught her before she hit the ground. Tom immediately pulled out his phone. I'm calling the hospital. Tell them we're 2 minutes away. I held my mother against my chest. It's okay. I'm here. You don't have to be scared. She looked up at me with tired eyes. I knew. She whispered so softly I almost missed it. I knew. You'd come. Those 4 words shattered whatever strength I had left. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to smile. Always. There isn't a place on this earth that could keep me away from you. Tom opened the truck door. Together, we helped her inside. As I climbed into the back seat beside her, my own phone vibrated. Laura. One text. Don't forget to take the trash bins out tonight. I stared at the screen. Not one question about my mother. Not one call asking if we'd made it safely. Not 1 ounce of concern. Just the trash. I slowly locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. In that moment, something inside me became very, very quiet. And sometimes, silence is the first sign that a marriage has already ended. Daniel reaches the hospital just as doctors rush his mother into the emergency unit. While he waits for news that could change everything, one cold message from Laura forces him to see his marriage through completely different eyes. The drive to Riverside Medical Center felt endless. Every minute stretched into an hour. I sat in the back seat beside my mother, holding her hand with both of mine, while Tom kept his eyes fixed on the road. She was trying to stay brave. I could see it. She kept forcing little smiles whenever she caught me looking at her, as if she were the one trying to comfort me. That was my mother, even when she was the one in pain. She worried about everyone else. Daniel, she whispered. Yes, Mom? If this turns out to be nothing. I gently shook my head. We're not taking that chance. She nodded. I just didn't want your whole day to be ruined because of me. A lump formed in my throat. My day would have been ruined if I stayed home. For the first time since the phone call, she smiled without forcing it. Tom pulled up to the emergency entrance. Before the truck had completely stopped, 2 nurses rushed outside with a wheelchair. One of them knelt beside my mother. I'm Rachel. We're going to take good care of you. My mother looked at her and quietly said, Thank you, sweetheart. The nurse smiled. You don't have to thank us? It's our job. No, Mom replied softly. It's your kindness. Those words made the young nurse pause for just a second. Then she squeezed my mother's hand. We've got you. Watching complete strangers show my mother more compassion than my own wife left a weight in my chest I couldn't explain. Inside the emergency department, everything happened fast. Blood pressure, heart monitor, blood samples, and ECG. Doctors moved around her bed with calm urgency. No one looked panicked, but no one looked relaxed either. A physician wearing navy blue scrubs finally approached me. "I'm Dr. Mason." "You her son?" "Yes," he nodded. She did the right thing by coming in quickly. My stomach tightened. "How serious is it?" "We don't know yet. The symptoms are concerning enough that we're treating this as a possible cardiac event. I'd rather overreact than be too late." I appreciated his honesty. It wasn't comforting, but it was real. An hour later, they moved my mother into an observation room. The monitors beeped steadily. Her color had improved slightly. When she opened her eyes and saw me sitting beside her bed, she reached for my hand. "You stayed," I almost laughed. "Where else would I be?" She squeezed my fingers. "You always were your father's son." Those words hit harder than she probably realized. My father had been gone for over a decade, yet somehow he still managed to guide me through moments like this. The doctor asked me to step outside while they reviewed her test results. I found myself alone in the waiting room. Plastic chairs, muted television, cold coffee from a vending machine that tasted like cardboard. People walked past carrying flowers. Others cried quietly into their phones. Hospitals have a strange way of making complete strangers feel connected. Everyone is waiting for news, some good, some devastating. I looked down at my own phone. Still nothing from Laura. Not a missed call, not a message asking how my mother was doing. Nothing. Then the screen lit up. For one brief second, I thought maybe, finally? She cared. I unlocked the phone. It was Laura. "Can you stop by the grocery store on your way home? We're out of coffee creamer." I stared at the message. Read it again. Then a third time, coffee creamer. My 81-year-old mother was lying in a hospital bed connected to heart monitors, and my wife was thinking about coffee creamer. I slowly placed the phone face down on the chair beside me. I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger is loud. This wasn't. This was something quieter, something colder. It was the moment hope quietly packed its bags and walked away. Around noon, Dr. Mason returned. His expression was calm, but serious. "Mr. Brooks?" I stood immediately. "Your mother suffered a mild heart attack." The words landed like a punch to my chest. He continued before I could speak. "The good news is you brought her in early. If she'd waited another hour or two—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I already understood. My knees felt weak. I leaned against the wall for support. The doctor placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "She's stable. She'll need medication, rest, and monitoring. But because she got here when she did, we expect a full recovery." I closed my eyes. For the first time that day, I breathed, not because everything was okay, but because she was still here, still alive, still my mother. I whispered a quiet thank you under my breath. Then I looked through the small window into her room. She was awake, smiling at one of the nurses. Even after everything she'd been through, she was making someone else's day a little brighter. And at that exact moment, I realized something that changed the way I saw my own life. The people who truly love you never make you wonder where you stand. They simply show up, some without being asked, others not even when it matters most. Daniel spends the afternoon beside his recovering mother, but one quiet conversation reveals a painful truth she's been hiding for years. Before the day is over, she'll make a decision that will change her family's future forever. The afternoon sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting thin golden lines across my mother's hospital room. For the first time that day, the machines around her seemed almost peaceful. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor was a sound I never thought I'd be grateful to hear. Mom was sitting up now, wrapped in a warm blanket with a cup of tea resting on the tray beside her. She looked tired, but she looked alive. That was enough. "You should eat something," she said, noticing I hadn't touched the sandwich sitting on the table. I smiled faintly. "I could say the same thing to you," she shrugged. "The hospital calls this chicken soup. I've tasted rainwater with more flavor." I laughed. A real laugh. It was the first one I'd managed all day. "You've still got your sense of humor." My father always said laughter keeps the heart beating. She looked toward the window. He wasn't completely wrong. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply sat there, enjoying the silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The peaceful kind that only exists between people who never have to wonder if they're loved. A soft knock interrupted the moment. Tom stepped into the room carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "I figured one of you might need this." "You read my mind," I said. He handed me 1 cup and smiled at my mother. "You gave us quite a scare." She looked almost embarrassed. "I certainly didn't plan it," Tom chuckled. "I've known you for 20 years. If you were going to make an entrance, I suppose it'd be dramatic." She laughed quietly. "Next time I'll settle for winning a pie contest." The 3 of us shared a smile. Looking around the room, I couldn't help noticing something. Tom wasn't family, yet he'd spent his entire day making sure neither of us felt alone. He never complained, never checked his watch, never acted as though he had somewhere more important to be. Some people carry kindness as naturally as breathing. Tom was one of those people. Around 3 o'clock, the cardiologist returned with the latest test results. He reviewed a few medications and explained the recovery process. "She's going to be just fine," he said, "but she needs to avoid stress. Regular checkups, healthy meals, and she shouldn't be living alone for a while." My mother immediately protested. "I've lived alone for 13 years. "I manage perfectly well," the doctor smiled. "I'm sure you do. But even the strongest people need someone nearby after something like this." After he left, Mom folded her hands in her lap. "You know, I hate feeling dependent." I pulled my chair closer. "You aren't. Asking for help doesn't make you weak." She looked down at the blanket. "No, but it reminds you that you're getting older." Her words lingered between us. I'd never heard fear in my mother's voice before. Not fear of dying, fear of becoming a burden. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Let me take care of you now." She looked at me for several long seconds, then her eyes softened. "You always were too much like your father." "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should." A few minutes later, she surprised me. "Daniel, can you do something for me tomorrow? Anything. I'd like to call Mr. Carter." I frowned slightly. "Our attorney?" She nodded. "I think it's time I updated a few things." The words caught me off guard. "Mom, you don't need to think about that right now." She smiled gently. "I'm not thinking about dying. I'm thinking about living wisely." She paused before continuing. "When something like this happens, it has a way of clearing the fog." I stayed quiet. She looked directly into my eyes. "I've had a lot of time to think since this morning. And sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we've been avoiding for years." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then spoke so calmly it almost frightened me. "I've watched your marriage from a distance. I've kept my opinions to myself because I never wanted to interfere." She took a slow breath. "But yesterday—" She looked toward the window. "I realized silence isn't always kindness." I felt my chest tighten. She continued before I could respond. "A woman who truly loves her husband doesn't leave him standing alone during the worst morning of his life." I couldn't argue, because every word was true. I made excuses for her, I admitted quietly. So did I. She gave me a sad smile. But excuses don't change character. The room fell silent again. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Inside, something much deeper was changing. Not in my mother, in me. For years, I'd convinced myself that patience could fix anything, that enough understanding could heal any relationship. But sitting beside the woman who had loved me unconditionally for 54 years, I finally understood something painful. Love isn't measured by promises. It's measured by presence. And when life demanded presence, Laura had chosen absence. Mom reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Carter." I nodded. "If that's what you want." "I'll make the call." She smiled with quiet certainty. Neither of us realized that one phone call the next morning would set events in motion, events that Laura would never see coming. While Daniel arranges a visit from his mother's attorney, Laura finally realizes something is terribly wrong. But by the time she begins calling her husband over and over, a life-changing decision has already been made, and there's no turning back. The next morning, I arrived at Riverside Medical Center just before 8. For the first time since the emergency, I didn't rush through the hospital doors. I simply stood there for a moment. The cold morning air filled my lungs. Yesterday, I had walked into this building terrified that I might lose the most important person in my life. Today, I was walking in with hope. When I reached my mother's room, she was already awake. Her reading glasses rested low on her nose, and she was working on a crossword puzzle as if she hadn't survived a heart attack less than 24 hours earlier. She looked up and smiled. "There you are." "I've been waiting," I laughed. "You've been waiting because you knew I'd bring coffee." "I won't deny it." I handed her the cup. She took a careful sip and closed her eyes. Now that's real coffee. I was beginning to think hospitals banned flavor. We both laughed. It felt good. Normal. Almost. After breakfast, I stepped into the hallway and made the call. "Good morning, Carter and Associates." "Good morning," I replied. "My name is Daniel Brooks. My mother, Margaret Brooks, would like to meet with Mr. Henry Carter today, if possible." There was a brief pause. "One moment, please." Less than a minute later, a familiar voice came through the phone. "Daniel, this doesn't sound routine." "It isn't. My mother wants to update her estate documents." Henry Carter had handled my father's affairs years earlier. He knew our family well. "I understand. I can be there around 1 this afternoon. She'll appreciate that. I'll see you then." When I returned to the room, Mom didn't ask whether I'd made the call. She simply looked at my face and nodded. "He's coming? You know me too well." A mother always knows. She folded her crossword puzzle and placed it neatly on the bedside table. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Anything." She looked directly into my eyes. "When was the last time you were truly happy?" The question caught me completely off guard. I searched for an answer. Nothing came. Not because I didn't want to answer, because I honestly couldn't remember. She saw it before I spoke. "I thought so." I sat down beside her bed. I kept telling myself marriage has difficult seasons. "It does," she agreed, "but difficult seasons eventually end." She reached for my hand. "If every season feels like winter, then you're no longer waiting for spring." The words settled deep inside me. I couldn't argue with them, because they described my life perfectly. Just after 1 o'clock, Henry Carter arrived. He was a tall man in his early 60s, dressed in a charcoal suit with a worn leather briefcase tucked beneath his arm. He greeted my mother warmly. "It's good to see you, Margaret. I wish it were under better circumstances." "So do I. But life rarely asks our permission." He smiled. "That sounds exactly like something you'd say." She gestured toward the chair beside her bed. "Please." They spoke for several minutes about her health before she finally looked at me. "Daniel, I'd like you to stay. You don't have to leave." I nodded quietly. "Of course." Henry opened his notebook. "What would you like to change?" Mom didn't hesitate. "I'd like to revise my will." His pen paused above the paper. "All right." "I'm listening." She folded her hands calmly. "Everything I've built with my late husband, our home, our savings, our investments, our personal belongings, I want them protected." Henry nodded. "That's certainly possible." She continued. "I also want to establish a charitable donation." He looked up. "What organization?" "The Hope Haven Children's Foundation. They've helped families in this town for decades." I've always intended to support them. I think now is the right time." Henry smiled. "I think they'd be honored." Then my mother became very quiet. She turned toward me, then back to Henry. "And there's one more thing." The room seemed to grow still. "I want to make it absolutely clear. My daughter-in-law, Laura Brooks, is not to receive any portion of my estate." Silence filled the room. Henry didn't react with surprise. He simply nodded professionally. "I understand. I'll make sure your wishes are legally documented." I opened my mouth to speak, but my mother gently raised her hand, not to silence me, to reassure me. "I'm not acting out of anger." She said it softly. "I'm acting out of clarity." She looked at Henry again. "I've spent my whole life believing that love is shown through actions. Yesterday proved everything I needed to know." Henry quietly continued writing. There was no judgment on his face, only respect. Nearly 40 minutes later, he closed his notebook. "I'll prepare the revised documents immediately. They'll be ready for your signature this afternoon." After he left, I remained seated without saying a word. Finally, I looked at my mother. "You didn't have to do that." She smiled. "Yes, I did. I've worked too hard to leave behind something that rewards indifference." Then she reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "What your father and I built belongs with someone who understands loyalty." Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times. Then again. I pulled it from my pocket. "Laura, 8 missed calls, 4 text messages." The latest one simply read, "Daniel, please answer. Something has happened." I stared at the screen for the first time in 2 days. She sounded afraid, but I couldn't help wondering. Was she afraid because my mother almost died, or because she had just learned what my mother had decided? I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. Some answers could wait. Laura finally confronts Daniel, desperate to undo the damage. But when she discovers that Margaret has already signed the new will, panic turns into desperation, and Daniel realizes his marriage has reached the point of no return. I didn't answer Laura's calls. Not the first one, not the 5th, not even the 12th. I simply slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked across the room at my mother. She was sitting quietly by the window, watching the afternoon sun settle over the hospital parking lot. There wasn't an ounce of regret on her face. Only peace. It was the kind of peace that comes after making a difficult decision you know is right. She noticed me watching her. "Is she calling?" I nodded. "Over and over." Mom smiled sadly. She finally realized actions have consequences. I lowered my eyes. I don't know what to say to her. "You don't have to say anything today." She reached for her tea. "Some conversations are better after emotions settle." I wanted to believe that, but deep inside, I knew this wasn't about emotions anymore. It was about truth. And truth has a way of refusing to stay hidden forever. At exactly 3 o'clock, Henry Carter returned with a folder tucked beneath his arm. Everything had been prepared. He carefully reviewed each page with my mother, explaining every paragraph in simple language. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, he looked at her one last time. "Margaret, are these your final wishes?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Has anyone pressured you into making these changes?" She smiled. "No one. This decision is entirely mine." He nodded and placed the documents in front of her. She adjusted her glasses, read each page carefully, then signed her name with the same steady handwriting I'd watched her use my entire life. One signature, then another, then the last. Henry gathered the papers and placed them back into the folder. "It's done." He shook my mother's hand. "I hope you won't need me again for many years." She smiled warmly. "So do I." After he left, the room became quiet again. I stared at the empty chair where he'd been sitting. Everything had changed, legally, permanently. There would be no reversing it. An hour later, the doctor stopped by with encouraging news. "If everything looks good overnight," he said, "we'll discharge you tomorrow morning." Mom's face lit up. "I've missed my own kitchen." The doctor laughed. I imagine your kitchen has missed you too. After he left, she looked at me. You'll bring me home? I smiled. You'll have to fight me if you think someone else is doing it. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I knew you'd say that. Around 5 in the evening, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The hospital courtyard was quiet. A few families sat on benches. An elderly couple walked slowly along the garden path. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then my phone rang again. Laura? This time, I answered. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she whispered, Daniel, I've been trying to reach you all day. I noticed. Her voice trembled. I didn't know. Know what? About your mom. About the will. The lawyer called to verify some information, and she stopped. I waited. Daniel, please tell me this isn't true. I looked across the parking lot. The evening breeze carried the smell of fresh rain. It is. She began crying. I made one mistake. One? I asked quietly. You think Wednesday was one mistake? I was stressed. I had meetings. I thought the ambulance would be faster. You thought? My voice remained calm. I wasn't asking what you thought. I was asking what you chose. Silence. Heavy silence. Then she whispered, I was going to come later. Really? What time? Another silence, longer this time. She had no answer, because there wasn't one. I've been thinking all day, she finally said. I'll apologize to your mother. I'll explain everything. I'll make this right. I closed my eyes. You still don't understand. What do you mean? This was never about the will. It's about Wednesday morning. It's about standing at the top of those stairs while I begged you for help. I wasn't asking you to cancel a vacation. I wasn't asking you to quit your job. My mother believed she might be having a heart attack. And you told me. I stopped for a moment. Even saying the words hurt. That you were busy. Laura began sobbing. I know. No, I replied softly. I don't think you do. If you understood, you never would have said it. Neither of us spoke for almost a full minute. Then she quietly asked, Can we fix this? I looked through the hospital window. My mother was laughing with one of the nurses. Even after everything, she was still making someone else's day brighter. I thought about Tom, the man who had dropped everything without hesitation. I thought about my father, the example he'd set. Then I thought about my marriage. 12 years of making excuses, 12 years of convincing myself that patience could replace partnership. Finally, I answered, I don't know. They were the most honest 3 words I'd spoken in years, because for the first time, I truly didn't. Laura cried quietly on the other end of the line. I don't want to lose you. I looked toward my mother's room one last time, the woman who had spent 54 years proving that love is something you do, not something you say. Then I quietly replied, Sometimes you don't lose someone in a single day. You lose them one choice at a time. I ended the call as I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I had no idea that tomorrow morning. When I brought my mother home, Laura would be waiting at the house, and what she was about to do would leave the entire neighborhood speechless. Margaret returns home after leaving the hospital, but before she can even step inside, Laura arrives desperate for forgiveness. What begins as an apology quickly turns into a confrontation that none of them will ever forget. Friday morning arrived colder than the day before. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that made the world feel quieter. I pulled into the hospital parking lot just before 9. For the first time in days, I wasn't walking toward uncertainty. I was bringing my mother home. When I stepped into her room, she was already dressed. She wore her favorite navy blue cardigan over a simple white blouse. Her small overnight bag sat neatly beside the chair. Everything about her looked familiar again, comforting. She smiled the moment she saw me. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me. I laughed. After everything we've been through this week? I'd never risk hearing that accusation. She chuckled. I had to try. Just then, Nurse Rachel entered, carrying the discharge papers. "Well," she said with a smile, "it looks like we're finally getting rid of our favorite patient." My mother raised an eyebrow. "I'd rather not come back any time soon." "I hope you don't." Rachel helped her into the mandatory wheelchair. Hospital policy. Mom accepted it with obvious reluctance. The second we rolled through the main entrance, she stood up on her own. "I appreciate the ride," she said with a grin, "but I can walk to my son's truck." Rachel laughed. "I had a feeling you'd say that." Before leaving, she hugged my mother gently. "You take care of yourself." "I intend to. And thank you." "For treating me like family." Rachel's eyes softened. "You made that easy." As we walked toward the parking lot, I realized something. Kindness has a way of creating family where blood never could. The drive home was peaceful. Mom rested quietly, looking out the passenger window. The familiar street slowly gave way to her neighborhood. Every tree, every mailbox, every front porch. It all seemed to welcome her home. "You know," she said softly, "I wasn't sure I'd see this street again." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Don't say that." "I'm only telling the truth." She smiled. "And today, it's a beautiful truth." When we reached her house, I carried her overnight bag inside. The familiar scent of cinnamon and fresh wood greeted us. It still felt like home. The framed family photographs remained exactly where they'd always been. Dad's old rocking chair sat beside the fireplace. Nothing had changed, except us. I made her favorite chamomile tea while she settled into her chair by the living room window. She wrapped both hands around the warm mug. "This," she whispered, "I've missed more than the hospital food." "I don't blame you." For several minutes we simply enjoyed the silence, the kind that heals. Then she looked at me. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy?" The question landed harder than I expected. I looked away, toward the family photographs lining the shelf. One picture caught my attention. My wedding day. Laura and I were smiling. We looked happy, or at least, we believed we were. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. Mom nodded. "I was afraid you'd say that." She reached across the table and covered my hand. "I've watched you become quieter every year. You smile less. You laugh less. And somewhere along the way, you stopped expecting to be loved the way you love others." Her words pierced straight through me. Because they were true. Painfully true. I kept thinking things would improve. I know. But hope only works when two people are building it together. She squeezed my hand gently. "You've been building alone." My phone buzzed. Laura, again. 31 missed calls. Now another message. "Please, I'm outside your mother's house. I need to talk." I stared at the screen. Mom noticed immediately. "She's here?" I nodded. She sighed quietly. I thought she might come. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Once, then again. Longer this time. Neither of us moved. A third ring echoed through the house. Mom calmly placed her tea on the table. "You should answer it." "Are you sure?" She nodded. Running from difficult conversations never solved anything. I walked to the front door. As I reached for the handle, I took one deep breath. When I opened it, Laura stood on the porch. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her makeup was gone. She looked exhausted. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to appear perfect. She simply looked broken. "Daniel?" Her voice barely escaped her lips. "I've made the biggest mistake of my life." I didn't answer. She glanced past me into the house. "Is your mother home?" "She is." "I need to apologize." "You should have apologized 3 days ago." Tears rolled down her face. "I know." "No," I said quietly. "You've only realized that now because you finally faced the consequences." She lowered her head. "I deserve that. I deserve worse." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us. Then a gentle voice came from inside the house. "Daniel." I turned. Mom was standing in the hallway, one hand resting lightly against the wall. She looked tired, but her eyes were steady. "Invite her in." I hesitated. Mom gave me a small nod. "Some conversations," she said softly, "should happen face to face." I stepped aside. Laura slowly crossed the doorway. The moment she entered the house, she looked around. The old photographs, Dad's chair, the family Bible resting on the side table. For the first time, she truly saw the home she'd been taking for granted all these years. She turned toward my mother. Her lips trembled. "I'm so sorry." Mom looked at her quietly. There was no anger in her eyes, no bitterness, only disappointment. And somehow, that hurt far more. She took a slow breath, then said 6 calm words that froze the entire room. "Sit down, Laura. We need to talk." The sound of the clock on the living room wall suddenly seemed louder than ever. None of us knew it yet. But the next 20 minutes would end one chapter of our lives and begin another. Laura begs for forgiveness, but Margaret has one final truth to share, a truth that changes Daniel's future forever. By the end of the conversation, one relationship will end, another will be strengthened, and a powerful lesson about loyalty, love, and family will leave everyone speechless. Laura lowered herself onto the edge of the sofa. She didn't lean back. She didn't relax. She sat as if the weight of the past 3 days had settled on her shoulders all at once. My mother remained standing for a moment before slowly returning to her favorite chair. She looked tired. Recovering from a heart attack would do that to anyone. But there was something else in her expression. Peace. The kind of peace that comes from having nothing left to hide. Laura wiped her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. I've replayed that morning 100 times. I should have gone. I should have driven Daniel. I should have been there." Mom listened without interrupting. When Laura finished, the room fell silent. Finally, Mom spoke. "I believe you're sorry." Laura looked up hopefully. "But being sorry and being changed, they aren't always the same thing." The hope on Laura's face faded. Mom continued gently. "When Daniel was 8 years old, he fell off his bicycle. He scraped both knees and broke his wrist. He cried all the way to the emergency room." She smiled faintly at the memory. "Do you know what he kept asking me?" Laura quietly shook her head. "He kept asking if I was okay." My throat tightened. I remembered that day. Dad had been working out of town. Mom had driven me to the hospital by herself. Even through the pain, I'd been worried about her. She looked at me and smiled. "That's who my son has always been." Then she turned back to Laura. "He has spent his entire life putting other people first. He deserved someone who would do the same for him." Laura broke down again. "I wanted to." "No," Mom said softly. "You wanted to after it cost you something." The words weren't cruel. They were honest. And somehow, that made them impossible to argue with. Laura looked at me. "Daniel, I know I can't erase what happened. But please, give me another chance." I searched her face. For years, I would have answered immediately. I would have found a reason, made another excuse, promised we'd work through it. But something inside me had changed. Not because of the will, not because of the phone calls, because of Wednesday morning, the moment I'd stood at the bottom of those stairs begging for help, and realized I was standing there alone. "I forgive you." The word surprised even me. Laura's eyes filled with hope. "But forgiveness," I continued quietly, "isn't the same as trust." The hope faded again. "You broke something. I don't know if it can be rebuilt." No one spoke for several seconds. Then my mother reached into the drawer of the table beside her chair and removed a small envelope. It looked old, carefully preserved. She handed it to me. "I've been keeping this for years." I frowned. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside was a folded letter. The handwriting was instantly familiar. My father's. My hands began to shake. "I wrote that letter with him 6 months before he passed," Mom said. "He asked me not to give it to you until I believed you truly needed it." I unfolded the paper. The first line blurred through my tears. "Son, if you're reading this, life has probably asked you to make a difficult decision. I swallowed hard and continued. Remember this. Never confuse loving someone with losing yourself. The right people will never ask you to sacrifice your dignity to keep their comfort. Choose peace over appearances. Choose loyalty over convenience. And never be afraid to walk away from a place where your heart has been lonely for too long. I couldn't read any farther. My vision disappeared behind tears. Mom reached over and gently rested her hand on mine. He knew you? He knew your heart. Laura quietly covered her face. I'm so ashamed. I know, Mom replied kindly. But shame only matters if it changes the person carrying it. Laura nodded slowly. It already has. I hope so. Mom smiled gently. For your sake. That afternoon I stayed with my mother until she fell asleep in her favorite chair. The house felt peaceful again. Before leaving, I tucked a blanket over her shoulders, just as she'd done for me countless times growing up. She opened her eyes briefly. I love you, Daniel. I love you too, Mom. Drive safely. I always will. I walked outside. The evening sun painted the neighborhood in shades of gold. Children laughed somewhere down the street. A breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, not because every problem had been solved, but because the truth no longer needed hiding. Laura stepped onto the porch behind me. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. I nodded. I think that's best. She looked at me one last time. I really did love you. I met her eyes. I believe you. But love without action, I paused, eventually becomes just another promise. She quietly nodded, then walked toward her car. I watched until she disappeared at the end of the street. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. Some endings aren't victories. They're necessary. Over the following months, my mother regained her strength. Every Sunday, I had dinner with her, just like when I was a boy. Sometimes Tom joined us. Sometimes neighbors stopped by. The house was full again, not because it was large, but because love has a way of making any place feel bigger. As for me, I eventually filed for divorce. Not out of revenge, not because of an inheritance, but because my mother had helped me see something I'd ignored for far too long. A healthy relationship isn't built on convenience. It's built on showing up, every single time, especially when life gets hard. The inheritance remained exactly as my mother intended. Years later, when she peacefully passed away in her sleep at the age of 88, her greatest legacy wasn't the house, or the savings, or anything written inside her will. It was the example she left behind. She taught me that love isn't measured by grand speeches. It isn't measured by expensive gifts. It isn't measured by words whispered only when everything is easy. Real love gets in the car without being asked. Real love sits beside you in hospital waiting rooms. Real love answers the phone. Real love shows up. And because of her, I finally learned to do the same for myself.